Labi, izskatās, ka vairāk jaunu cilvēku klāt nenāk. Tad prieks jūs šodien šajā pēcpusdienā redzēt. Mani sauc Kāpēc, es pārstāvu HyperConverged Solutions, un kā jau ielūgumā minēts, tad mūsu šīs dienas valoda būs gan latviešu, gan angļu. And I shortly will introduce you with our colleagues from vendor side, Rick and William. Rick is responsible for business development and William is technical colleague. So please ask your questions during the session about all interested questions you have, and they will detail and explain that. And guys, I will switch now back to Latvian and do a small introduction, and after that I will ask you to continue. Tā kā, jā, šodienas tēma aktuāla hiperkonverģence, un tā kā mūsu infrastruktūra, sākumā gan pāris vārdi par mani. Kā jau minēju, mani sauc Kāpēc, esmu aktīvajā tirdzniecībā jau 13 gadus, un tas, kā es veidoju sadarbību, ir tikai un vienīgi ilgtermiņā, un to saskatu apusē izdevīgā sadarbības modelī, jo tikai, ja jums izdodās, tad izdosies arī mums. Pāris vārdos par HyperConverged Solutions, mēs esam izplatītājs, kurš savus risinājumus piegādā klientiem caur partneru tīklu. Partneru tīkls ir ik viens IT uzņēmums Latvijā, un mūsu misija ir palīdzēt aizsargāt organizāciju digitālos aktīvus no ārējiem un iekšējiem draudiem. Un mēs to darām pateicoties mūsu plašajiem portfoliem, kurā ir gan drošības, gan infrastruktūras risinājumi. Šeit detalizētāk ir redzams mūsu pilnais portfels. Tajā ir aptuveni 30 līdz 40 ražotāji, kuru aktualitāte ir, teiksim, izveidota pēc tā, ko mēs redzam, kas tirgu ir svarīgs un aktuāls pie klientiem. Ja mēs runājam par portfeļu iedalījumu, tad pamatā viens no lieliem pīlāriem ir drošības risinājumi, un tos mēs iedalām perimetra drošībā, gala iekārta drošībā un datu drošībā. Šie trīs, es teiktu, ir ļoti svarīgi pīlāri, lai nodrošinātu organizācijas, teiksim, funkcionālu pastāvēšanu, pasargājoties no ikdienas draudiem, kādi mums šodien ir sastopami, pat es teiktu pārāk daudz, jo, diemžēl, ir organizācijas, kas vēl savu darbu tieši iekārtot mūsu, teiksim, kompetenciālu iegūst, jo kompromitētu vienā mūsu darbību. Tad lielu daļu īstenībā.
Carlos, you're losing your audio, mate.
Sorry?
Yeah, there you go, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rick.
Sure.
Un, jā, pie kā es paliku pie tā, ka viens no lieliem stūrakmeņiem ir HCI, par ko mēs arī šodien runāsim, un, protams, neaiztikt bez backupa tīkla un tīkla drošības. Un ar tīkla drošību mēs saprotam network detection un response risinājumu. Un īstenībā patīkam apzināties, ka tas risinājums, ko mēs pārstāvam, proti Vai HCI, ir atzīts par līderi šajā te nozarē, un to es uzzināju nesen izlasot vienu ziņojumu par NDR risinājumiem. Un, kā jūs redzējāt, mūsu portfels ir diezgan plašs, bet ikdienā mēs arī bieži paplašinām šo skaitu ar jauniem risinājumiem, jauniem ražotājiem. Kā jūs minējāt, to nosaka tirgus pieprasījums, aktualitāte pie klientiem. Un arī te palīdz mūsu franču kolēģi, kuri arī padalās ar labiem risinājumiem. Un tad pārējiem pie mūsu šīs dienas zvaigznes, kas ir HCI risinājums, ko pārstāv HyperConverged Solutions, un tas ir scale computing. Un šodien atbildēsim uz vairākiem sekojošiem jautājumiem par HCI kā platformu, jo es, teiksim, savā es teiktu, ilgajā pieredzē esmu dzirdējis vairākus, teiksim, tādus stereotipus un varbūt tās aizspriedumus par HCI kā tādu. Tāpēc mēs šodien atbildēsim uz jautājumu, kāpēc HCI infrastruktūra ir nākotnes platforma, kādas tā ir cenas, ko tā atvieglo būtībā. Jo tas, ko es esmu daudz reizes dzirdējis, ir tas, ka šie risinājumi, ir kā esot sarežģīti un tāpat laikā arī dārgi. Bet es gribētu teikt, ka mūsu infrastruktūras pie klientiem nevar atļauties sarežģītus risinājumus, jo tie būtībā veido šī risinājuma cenu. Un IT komandas mūsdienās ir pārāk mazas, to man saka IT vadītāji, IT komandas locekļi, un ir grūti tikt galā ar sarežģītiem risinājumiem. Tāpēc mēs parunāsim par to, vai HCI risinājums ir mūsdienu platforma, un vai tas ir piemērots arī maziem un vidējiem uzņēmumiem, proti arī uzņēmumiem ar mazu infrastruktūru. Un, protams, arī visbeidzot arī parunāsim par to, kā ir migrēt no klasiskās infrastruktūras uz HCI. Un pāris vārdos par to, kāpēc mēs izvēlējāmies strādāt ar šo ražotāju. Vispirmām kārtām tas, ka mēs redzam, ka tas ir perspektīvas ražotājs un tirgu, tas ir jau kopš 2008. gada. Tas ir arī atrodams ražotājs, kas jau par daudz ko liecina. Un, manuprāt, šis ražotājs ir piemērots Latvijas tirgu. Latvijas tirgu. Manā līdzinājā pieredzē ir tādiem zināmiem Latvijas ražotājiem.
You gone again, mate?
Yes, thanks. Tādiem zināmiem ražotājiem kā Vai HCI un HP Simplicity, Cisco HyperConverged.
Charlie,
Yes.
audio is really getting terrible.
Okay, I will try to find my headphones. Hope now is better.
Yeah.
Okay. Atvainojamies par kvalitāti, grūti bija to pašam novērtēt. Nu, lūk, un sastopoties ar šiem te minētajiem plaši pazīstamiem risinājumiem, paši par sevi risinājumi ir ļoti labi, taču nonākot līdz piedāvājumu saskaitīšanai, bieži sastapos ar situāciju, kad klienti saka, ka viņi nav gatavi šādu summu maksāt. Un no savas pieredzes gribētu teikt, ka tas rodās tādu iemeslu dēļ, ka iespējams, ka šī funkcionalitāte, ko piedāvā šī risinājuma, ir pārāk plaša, respektīvi uzņēmumi nevēlas pārmaksāt. Iespējams, ka lietas būtība ir tajā, kad ir līdzinājā pieredze, un mēs esam pieredzējuši to, ka viss jau līdz šim strādā labi, kāpēc kaut ko mainīt, kāpēc iet uz citu nezināmu tehnoloģiju. Vai arī par piemēru, šis pats stereotips, ko es minēju, ka HCI dārgs un sarežģīts infrastruktūrā. Un ko man arī vēl saka IT vadītāji, IT darbinieki, ka bieži ir grūti pamatot šīs te izmaksas, kas rodas no infrastruktūras iegādes, jo vadība saredz, teiksim, biznesu kā lietu, kas ir jātīsta, bet viņi pamatā varbūt tās neiedziļinās tajā, ka visam pamatā tomēr ir IT, kas šo te biznesa platformu uztur. Un te arī nonākam līdz tam, ko es iepriekš minēju, ka mēs nevaram atļauties sarežģītus risinājumus, jo būtībā maza IT komanda nepietiekami resursi noved pie tā, ka parasti jādzēš ugunsgrēks, nevis jātīsta, teiksim, infrastruktūra, un tas var novest pie, teiksim, neparedzētām tīkstāvēm. Un vēl viena būtiska lieta, ko es gribētu uzsvērt, ka risinājums ir ļoti vienkāršs un viegli uzstādāms. Un, lai par to pārliecinātos, mēs varam nodrošināt arī demo klāsteri, kur jūs varat uzstādīt savā infrastruktūrā un par to pārliecināties klātienē. Un visu beidzot, noderīga un saprotama lieta ir tā, ka risinājums ir piemērots jebkurai nozarei. Un te kā par piemēru es gribētu minēt to, ka tas ir, teiksim, neklātienes infrastruktūrai ļoti atbilstoši, jo par piemēru varētu minēt kuģniecību, kur galvenā infrastruktūra, teiksim, no edge infrastruktūras ir atrauta ikdienā, un tam par piemēru ļoti labi kalpo edge computing. Un, jā, tātad tas arī noderīgs gan mācību, gan valsts, gan ražošanas, gan medicīnas, gan mazumtirdzniecības struktūrās. Par to tālāk pastāstīs kolēģi no Scale Computing. Es sākumā vienīgi gribētu jautāt, varbūt tās par manu stāstu ir kādi jautājumi, prāt uz tiem atbildēšu. Ok, ja jautājumu nav, tad, lai jums interesanta sesija, es gribētu iedrošināt, ka veidosim to interaktīvu, uzdodiet jautājumus sesijas laikā, lai kolēģi no Scale Computing var uz tiem atbildēt. So, okay, Rick, I could ask you to continue. We don't hear you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Carlies. Might not come as a total surprise, but I'm very limited when it comes to Latvian language skills. So if you have any questions, you can either ask them in English to me directly or in a chat. using the window that you see, and then I'm sure Carlies will translate. If you have a question, just pop it, and then we will go through it right away. Having said that, before we start, with me in the call is William van Kollenberg, our technical support engineer, or sales engineer, I should say. So the first part of this presentation will be about who it is and what we do, and the second part will be a technical demonstration of the product in working as it is. What we're going to show you today is a phenomenon called HCI, and HCI is an abbreviation that stands for Hyper-Converged Infrastructure. Hyper-Converged Infrastructure is something that came up about 10 years ago. It's way past being a buzzword now, and is a serious replacement of what you would have as an infrastructure for your virtual machines. The core of hyperconvergence is that we integrate layers into a single solution architecture. So your server, your storage, your hypervisor, your underlying network, all this is integrated into one single solution, and it has quite some advantages. If we look at the traditional way of making a virtual environment, then you will see here your virtual VMs that are created with their own separate virtual disks. This is all hosted on a number of servers by a virtualization layer, such as, this is VMware, could also be Hyper-V, could be Sensor, could be anything. And on the back of it, just to make sure that the physical servers, the physical resources are available, there is a storage unit attached to your network. Well, looking at this shows you how complex the solution is. And you can imagine, especially if you have components layers from different vendors, that it's going to be quite a trick to do the upgrade within this system. And so with an ever ongoing need for making things easier, hyperconvergence was developed, and the core thought behind hyperconvergence is that you will have separate silos from which your virtual machines can take the resources that they need. So the RAM, the core, and the storage, that the networking is all being done. And as a result, you will get a system that reduces, or even in our case, eliminates complexity. We just make it very easy to understand, very easy to manage, very easy to comprehend. Another advantage, since you do not have all those separate layers, that it's very easy to scale out your solution and make it custom fit to your organization or to your customer's organization. Having this and spreading the risk of downtime also eliminates the downtime on the lane and enhances the resilience of the solution. I mean, in this setup, you have 3 servers that each contain a part of the total storage capacity, where if you have a single SAN, you have all your eggs in one basket, just as a simple indication of how this helps in enhancing your resiliency. This is not unique, by the way, for scale. This is the core principle of hyperconvergence. And this is also something that we build. But we do it differently. We differ at a number of points, but we'll get to that in a second. First of all, let me introduce you to HC3. HC3 is our product, is our platform on which we offer a hyperconverged infrastructure. And it means that virtualization, servers, and storage is all integrated into one solution and managed by a single piece of software that includes everything that you need. The 4 pillars of HC3 are simplicity, availability, scalability, and affordability. Start with the first one, simplicity. That's a word you will hear more often as the show goes on. We are providing a solution for an infrastructure. And an infrastructure is basically a necessary evil in order to run your applications, right? It doesn't add anything other than this platform. Your applications, they make the difference. You use your applications to check your inventory, send an invoice, communicate with your customers, and all those kind of things. Run your production process. So those are important. That's where your focus, that's where your key attention should be. This runs on a box that has lighting LEDs, blinking LEDs in green and or red or no blue. That should just be there. It should work and nothing more to it. That's exactly the approach we take for infrastructure. So we keep it as simple as possible so that it will take you as less time as possible to manage it and to work around it. So to give you real examples of how we do that simplicity, we have a very simple unified management tool that runs from an HTML5 browser that doesn't require any installation on other endpoints. It doesn't require any training, any certification. Anybody with 3 to 6 months of proper IT knowledge can manage your scale environment. You will see that in a second. The second is if you have experience with those larger virtual environments, you might come to know that you have to create a LUNs and define your storage on your SAN and whatnot. With scale, you do not have that problem. HC3 makes sure that all the storage that is available in your nodes is available in a single storage pool without any interference from your side required. It deploys within an hour. We ship our product as an appliance, so it's a turnkey solution that comes in your facility. Within an hour, you can deploy it, and it's basically just unpacking the boxes, racking and stacking your nodes, initializing the one, and then after, let's say 45 minutes, the first virtual machine can go live. It is really that easy. Once they go live, once they run, they keep on running. The second pivotal point of HC3 is availability. We provide an infrastructure. Infrastructure should be there. Infrastructure allows your applications to run, so we will make sure your applications do not go down. And that's why, for example, we use self-healing technology. Self-healing means, the word says it by itself, if something goes wrong, we will find a way to carry on without the component that has failed, right? Let's give you an example. We use write factor 2 for our data storage, and it means that every bit of data is stored on 2 different disks on 2 different nodes. That means that whatever time, your data will be available on 2 locations, right, on different disks. Now imagine that somewhere in your nodes, let's say node number 2, disk number 3 shows more than average disk errors. The system will then, if it comes above a certain threshold, determine that that disk is no longer reliable. Okay, that might go down, it might cause a problem. Before it can cause any problems, it will simply do a few things. The first thing that it does is that it goes to the secondary location of the data, and from there copy it again to new locations, so your data is redundant again outside the failing disk, right? The second thing that it does, it instructs you that node 2 disk 3 is no longer reliable and should be ejected. In fact, it's already been shut out of the system. It doesn't cooperate anymore. All you need to do is contact support to make sure you get a replacement for that disk. But in the meantime, your data is still redundant and your operation still carries on. There's no downtime whatsoever, despite this defect disk. And you can lose quite a bit of disks as soon as they've run through this additional cycle. So even if there's another disk going down, there's not a problem. If you're not able to swap that disk within the next 36 hours, not a problem. We have situations where our lab had a system that took 18 months between the first message and the moment that they replaced the disk. It just kept on running, no problem. Another very cool feature is, and William will show you that in detail, technology like backup, functionality, I would say, like backup replication and disaster recovery are included in the system. Okay, so you don't need normally additional backup software in order to keep your data safe and to make sure that your business keeps up and running. It is all there, and we'll show you that in a second. Third part, of course, business are growing things, right? It's not stable, it's not solid, it's not fixed. So you need to be able to expand at a certain time. Now, of course, you can expect a certain growth in the next 3 to 5 years and anticipate on that upfront, right? So let's say currently you need 10 terabytes of storage, and you think it will grow to 60 terabytes in the next 5 years. So when you buy a new infrastructure, you're going to add 50 terabytes upfront to your system because you might need that in the near future. Well, that's where you go, right? You don't know what's going to happen. Maybe something happens that requires you to use way more storage. Maybe something happens that only allows you to a new storage protocol, for example, that only requires you to use 30 terabytes instead of 50 or 60. For that, we have a system that's called mix and match. And that means that any existing cluster of scale nodes can be expanded with the resources that you need. Okay, so when it comes to RAM, when it comes to cores, you can add, if space provides, processors or memory units to your nodes and expand the capacity as such. When it comes to storage, you can add other nodes to your cluster that expand your total storage pool. Now, the storage itself can be there in many different configurations. It can be spinning disk, it can be SSD, it can be NVMe, it can be a hybrid version of 2 of the 3. There will always be the possibility to expand with whatever you need. And if you expand with a node that adds more storage and you still have enough cores and enough RAM in your system, you only need to take a very small of those two resources, and you can run this node in a what we call storage only mode. And in storage only mode, the node will not use itself for virtualization, and therefore you don't need to license it for Windows Server, for example, for Oracle or whatever you want to use. Fourth, last but not least, the affordability of the system. We are able to offer a complete stack that includes everything. So you don't have to worry about additional features that you need to purchase. You don't need to worry about the maximum number of nodes that you can run simultaneously. You don't have to worry about additional functionality that you want to have licensed, and so on and so on. Everything that you see is in there, and that includes your virtualization layer. So you don't have additional cost, for example, for VMware. Your management tooling is always inclusive. So if you use Hyper-V now, there's no need to take HCCM additionally, additionally to it. So everything you need is in there. And as a starter, with the simplicity, the requirements are that it takes way less time to manage this system compared to other systems. Okay, so not only do you have a lower price, but you also have lower cost to run it. Now, one of the key features where that shows is the so-called virtual storage appliance. If you go back to the initial slide that I showed you with the old school, let's say, virtualization method, there you will see all these different layers. And what happened to most parties that went to HCI is that they took a number of file systems in between those layers to make sure that they could control the data up and down. They put this in a virtual storage appliance, and VSA, for those of you who are familiar with Nutanix, they call it CVM when it comes to Nutanix. And basically what it is a stack number of file systems to steer your data from the VM to your storage. And if you take a look at the model on the left-hand side, it's a graphical representation where if you open a document, you change a dot into a comma, you save it again, redundantly of course, it will take you 36 steps in order to do so. Keep in mind that every step is a processor cycle and therefore causes a latency. Now, of course, you are willing to say, well, that's a latency in a processor, and my latency in my storage is way higher, so that's not a problem. You're fully right there, as long as you take spinning disk as a storage. But if you go to SSD or even NVMe, then that latency is no longer in your storage, and your software is going to be your bottleneck. Okay, we don't have that problem. We have a system where we define our own file system that allows us directly communicate from our virtual machines to our storage. And that means that for the same principle, we do not need 36 steps, but only 12. Read 3 times as fast. In fact, there's been tests done by Intel where they took all the available HCI protocols and tested that on their own NVMe systems, and they came to 300 to 500 microseconds on the number of HCI protocols. I believe it was Nutanix. Then they started to test scale, and they ended up between 10 and 30 microseconds. So it shows you the immense strength that this process has over the VSA model. But there's something else, and that's even way more important. The VSA is in fact, the CVM as they call it, is in fact a very large virtual machine that needs to start the minute you switch on your system. And it consumes up to 8 cores, 96 gigs of RAM, a third of your net available storage when you start it. And that means that the overhead is quite big on your system. All right. And that's also, I mean, if you, why HCI initially, when the flight then went to enterprise grade environments, because if you have so many cores available, it doesn't matter that your VM takes, there's a VM there that takes 8 cores because you have enough others. But if your system gets smaller, and especially what we see now in terms of edge computing, where we want to move workloads outside of a data center and run them locally in a high availability environment, we don't want to have 80 gigs of RAM in order to run 8 gigs of workload and the rest as an overhead. We don't have that problem since we do not need to fire up that VSA. And as a result, we reserve 4 gigabytes of RAM for both the hypervisor and the operating platform in each node. And that allows you to be way more flexible and use a way smaller footprint on your hardware resources. You see that here. And let's take 96 gigs of RAM, for example. If that's what your VSA is consuming, then the spare space that you have for VMs is very limited, as you see here. Let's take the one on the left-hand side, 128 gig server, where 96 gigs goes on to your VSA, but only allows you with 36 gigs of RAM, 32, sorry, to run your virtual machines on, and the rest is taken by the system. Moving to smaller servers, you can't even run an HCI platform. You don't even have the advantages that HCI brings when it comes to high availability, when it comes to scalability, and so on. If you look at scale, we only reserve that 4 gigabytes, as I said before. And that means that on the 28 gigs RAM servers, you got 124 gigs of RAM available for your virtual machines. On the 64, you still have 60. On 32, you still have 28. And that means we can also run on 16 and even on 8 gig servers with all the advantages that HCI has to deliver and with all the features that we standardly add to those devices. If you translate that to a product overview, then you see here what we need. As I said before, we supply our products as an appliance, and you see here the appliance on which we do that. All the way on the left-hand side, you might recognize this as the Intel NUC. We take that as a base node, we call it an HE150. And by combining 3 HE150s into a cluster, we have created a high availability environment where easily you can run 25 VDIs without a problem, where you can run a fixed number of workloads locally without the need of having a local IT engineer to babysit the system because something might go wrong. If something goes wrong, the system will reclaim itself and run on. Management can be done remotely instead of locally. And that allows you to run your workloads outside your data center as you wish to do with a number of them. Moving further to the right, you will see them getting bigger. The HE is really the edge line, right? So the 150 is smaller, the 500 is somewhat bigger. And then we move to 1000, 3000, 5000 series. These are nodes where you can go up to 1.5 terabytes of RAM per node, include NVMe storage, include GPUs, 25 gig networking, whatever you need, everything you want to build your own data center, for example, to run massive loads of workloads in or outside the data center, no matter. Last thing you can do is take our software and run it in a Google Cloud instance, and that allows you to have temporary workloads up there. DR workloads, as I said before, the functionality is already embedded in the software. All you need is a target for it. Well, one of those targets could be HC3 Cloud Unity. As I said, within Google, there's 5 data centers across the world where you can select where you want to run your workloads, and that's perfect for temporary or for DR. So where are we on the market? Well, we are, contrary to other HCI vendors, not targeting corporate, not targeting enterprise world IT centers, but instead we run at SME, we run at mid-market organization, and more importantly, distributed enterprise, read edge, so smaller devices outside the main data center that run local workloads. And that's a great benefit for organizations who don't have extensive IT staff or have many locations without an IT manager on every location, right? I remember when I started working 25 years ago, I was at an American print company called QMS, and we had a small sales and marketing office that was outside the head office. The head office was about 10 kilometers down the road, and we were in this nice tower where it's just a sales and marketing office. We didn't have an IT engineer, so there was one guy who was quite smart with Office, and he was appointed to run the Office, Outlook, whatever you had. Imagine that you have that circumstance, and you have a local instance where you are in the workloads. If you don't have the need to have a person there, I mean, this was something that he did in between, right? Well, if you do a bit of both, you do not enough of anything. So without that need, you're way more flexible in running those workloads locally, and that gives you all the benefits that it does. And don't be fooled by the fact that we have those small ones. If you want to run hundreds of VMs, that's not a problem. We can do that as well. We can custom file it to any size that you like, up to 8 nodes in the cluster and up to 25 clusters in the default view, and up to thousands of sites if you want to add a full edge deployment. As a result, because we make it so easy, because we have this very small footprint, we have the lowest TCO in the market when it comes to HCI. And in fact, you see the number below there. Even if you look at the traditional VMware solutions, that does require certification, that does have its downtime, does require 12 hours of management per week. Adding it all up, you would end up at a higher TCO than you would with scale. And as a result, from the miniaturization, let's say, we have true edge computing solutions available. I know, for example, there's a number of hyperscalers that also offer you an edge solution, and it's a large 19-inch rack that you put on premise, run your workloads, and sync it with the hyperscalers platform. Amazon is one of those. But imagine you only have a limited number of workloads. You don't need this big 19-inch rack to run that locally. You want to have it on a small pair of nodes that is high available, that doesn't need any management whatsoever. So what are the advantages? If you look at the other, I said it before, the true SMB proposition that we offer. Nobody else does this. VMware does it when it comes to their elements. Now Essential Plus kit, and that's nice, but that's just virtualization. That's not high availability, that's not remote, etc. And there are certain limits to what you can run there. You can only do that on 3 nodes with a maximum of 6 CPUs. After which you have to license all your nodes with the existing enterprise licenses at a large cost. The second thing that we do is we make it as simple as possible. All the complexity is either moved away under the bonnet or kicked out of the system completely. Okay, so you don't need to worry about that. As a result, we have the lowest TCO because it's way more economical. You don't need as much expensive components, you don't need the training, you don't need certification, you don't spend the time on managing your infrastructure. In fact, people who come to scale from other platforms say that they save 40 to 75% of time managing their infrastructure. Last but not least, ease of use, very, very important. Everything that you see is included. It's all in pricing, without limits, without surcharges, without additional licenses to be managed, without external hypervisors, and with everything that we sell comes premium support. And premium support, unlike what other people offer, with us is really immediate support. And it means that you will get a local phone number that you can call 24/7. And if you call that, it will take you 2 minutes and you will talk to, It will take you 2 minutes and then you will have maximum, and then you will talk to a scale engineer. And that scale engineer is either in the UK or in the US, has the ability to replicate your problem, has also the ability, if you allow them to give access to your cluster, they can work remotely, do all the things that they need to do without you having to do anything, run a report and upload it to an FTP server over the web. None of that, everything is provided for that. And people so much appreciate it. We get an average Net Promoter Score of 91 from customers who are using Skill. All right. To name a few examples of customers that we have in Europe, and also to show you that's a big variety in types. You see on the top there, Genting Casino Alders. Genting is a large casino chain in the UK. They have 42 casinos in England alone, but they're also expanding now over the globe with casinos, with resorts. They just opened a large resort in Las Vegas, where we did the backups of the CCTV. I think we're controlling 12,000 cameras there, all on Scale clusters. Delhaize is a supermarket in Belgium with 800 stores. Very nice feature from those guys, by the way. We started there in March of 2018, so that's 4 years ago. They have 800 stores and they're gradually expanding the Scale infrastructure into all these stores. They started off with their own stores. They have 250 stores of their own and 550 on their franchise. We started in those first 250 in the first 2 years, I think. At that time, after 2 years, we didn't have a single minute of downtime in any of those stores. Now, keep in mind that downtime can cost about 5,000 euros per minute in a supermarket like this. People cannot pay for their shopping, so they just leave the cart abandoned. But also freezers and coolers are affected because they are switched off. Doors can't open, you name it. It's quite a substantial an amount that they have in losses when it comes to data to downtime. And in fact, because of the fact that they did budget for a downtime, they didn't need the money. They took that and invested it to make sure that all the franchise stores will also get a scale cluster in their supermarkets. All right. And that means that every local workload runs on that cluster, whether it's cash register, whether it's the self-scanners, whether it's in-store advertising, coolers, freezers, inventory management, gates, doors, anything runs on that cluster. So it's not depending on internet connectivity, but it also is not depending on local people that manage that infrastructure, because they simply don't need to do that. Other examples, you see the Vita, which is a large printing house in Sweden. You see Coca-Cola, which is Coca-Cola beverages in Africa. They have 60 locations over the continent, both in bottling and in distribution centers that all run on this. So a lot of different companies that, if you look at it at first, that are completely different. There are two main things that they have in common. First of all, they have multiple locations where they don't have staff on every location to run an IT infrastructure by themselves. And secondly, they cannot afford downtime. It's just too expensive. It's too costly. It's going to stop the whole process. They don't want it. And because they're using scale, they don't need local IT staffing, and they will not have any downtime. Well, we can't say that hard, of course, but if something happens, the system will just carry on, and they will not face downtime in their operation. Okay, so how can you deploy this? Very easy to start with. Take a main cluster where you run your local applications. Of course, you might have some software as a service applications as well. Office 365, Salesforce, some ERP, whatever you have. You combine those on a single workspace, and you can simply work. As I said, the backup and disaster recovery functionality are included, so that's easily added to your cluster, whether you want to have just the backup data storage or you want to have a full external location. If something happens to your main cluster, you can easily spin up your VMs and keep on running as if nothing is going on. Of course, you can do that on a single location, but also on remote locations, and there you can choose whether you're going to host those applications centrally on your main cluster, or you take some of them and you run them remotely, and even then you can choose whether you take a single node that you replicate to the main cluster, or you take a 3-node cluster and you create local high availability for your workloads. That combination became very popular when COVID hit, and of course that to work from home in a safe manner is using VDI. Virtual desktop infrastructures, really, really easy to manage, really powerful to run on the scale cluster, and simple to integrate with any public cloud or SaaS offerings that you might have. And of course, you can combine the things. You take VDI on one hand, you can take local workloads from another, and still be combined with all the backup and disaster recovery features that you want to have. That's in brief what we offer, what we do. Just a small word about ourselves. You might not have heard of Scale before today, or when you received the invitation from Hermitage. We are an American software company. We've been around since 2008, initially with a storage solution, but we decided to integrate a hypervisor tool in 2010. One of the first pioneers on the HCI market, but meanwhile, we are the leader when it comes to especially this SME side of the market. Everything we do, and that's a lot, is around keeping it as simple as possible, eliminating complexity, and making sure there's a high availability as a standard. Speaking of standard, the premium support that I discussed is also standard, regardless of the node that you buy. We have our own software, our own support center that is available 24/7. So we do not use offshore call centers, people reading scripts, having no clue what you got, what your problem might be. You will immediately get a scale engineer that helps you. There's over 5,000 happy customers over the world that have more than 20,000 systems installed. As I said before, very, very pleased with the after-sales service that we provide, and rewarding us with an average net promoter score of 91, which is a great number. As you know, net promoter scores go from -100 to +100, so an average of 91 people are really satisfied with you. Company is still privately owned, we're not stock listed yet, but we do have global operations. We have 2 headquarters in the US, one in India, one in San Francisco. We have a European headquarters here in the Netherlands, where both William and I are based as well. Country organizations in Germany, in the UK, in Canada, and in South Africa. And we work together with a number of companies that either complement our fulfillment, or we do it the other way around. As I said, we supply it as an appliance, so we work together with Lenovo, with Dell, with Intel, with Supermicro to get nodes that we use to install our software on and supply it as an appliance. Google Cloud Platform to run it in the cloud instance. NVIDIA and Intel is really on component level, so GPUs and NVMe storage, for example. And we work together with software companies like Kronos and Parallels, where we also integrate their support with our own support desks. I'm going to skip this for a minute because it basically was that, the difference. Why would HC3 be good to you? Well, first of all, it's a very flexible and powerful solution. As I said before, if you want to run 5,000 seats, you can do it. If you have a local organization that wants to run 2 or 3 workloads in a remote location, you can do it as well. You can spread those workloads among multiple sites. If you are a supermarket with 10,000 outlets, not a problem. If you are a shipping company that wants to run local infrastructure on board of all vessels without the need of having an IT engineer on board, you can do it. So you're very flexible in creating autonomous platforms to run your workloads on. System is very, very reliable. There's virtually no downtime. We heard that we did an inquiry with VMware users, about 200 users, that indicate that the average downtime per year on VMware is 29 minutes, where we have none. Well, you can see what the result is of downtime. Before you got it up again, you're easily it takes a lot of time before everything is back in. Our system doesn't have a problem. It's self-healing. You can set and forget, and there's no strings attached, so you can really operate your workloads wherever you are. Last but not least, as I said before, the lowest TCO in the market. You don't need any training with us because we keep it so simple. You don't need certification that you need to replace every 2 years. I think the worst of them all is, of course, Microsoft, where you can get a training to understand what their trainings are like. We don't have all that. We have an all-in solution that really saves you 40 to 75% time on managing your infrastructure, saving you the cost on that, and so on. Any questions so far? I haven't been able to look at the chat. I don't think it has been. Are there any questions? Please unmute and ask.
Jā, droši ir kaut kādi jautājumi, jautājiet, lai kolēģi var izskaidrot.
Anything you didn't understand where I went too fast? Whatever. If not, then I would like to...
So there was just a bunch of information, and you're going through it so quickly. Just wanted to summarize it up. So basically, you're providing all basically from the beginning till the end. You're providing servers, support, configuration, setup, everything. And you can just run our virtual machines, scale them, and disaster recovery. We can use that cloud infrastructure as well.
Yeah, that is correct. And
sounds great. Sounds great.
Trust me, it is.
Okay, of course.
Yeah, everything you need is in there, from server and storage, virtualization integration, backup, disaster recovery, a very stable, very affordable, and very reliable platform that you can use to run your virtual.
Okay, one question. How about the deploying virtual machines? If there's some templates possible, you can copy them, or how that's done?
Yes, to all of them, but you will see that in the Williams demo in a second.
Okay, so it'll be a demo. Great.
So without further ado, let's switch to William. I will stop my screen. Stop sharing it now, I should say.
Cool. So just to introduce myself, hi, my name is William van Kollenberg. I'm a sales engineer at Skill Computing, which means that from a technical perspective, I assist Rick and I assist everybody that deals with Rick. So I will also be there in part to assist you together with my UK colleague Ian. What you're seeing right now in your screen is the management surface for a Skill Computing cluster. So this is the platform where you will interact with the cluster. And as Rick said, everything that we've done, basically our DNA is to make things as easy as possible, to make sure that somebody with 3 to 6 months of IT experience can operate this solution. So let's go through it. That simplicity actually starts immediately with, in the left upper corner, the version number that the cluster is running. The version number itself obviously isn't that important. What is important is how do you deal with things like updates. I started my IT career at Dell a long time ago when EMC was still an OEM product, and when VMware was brand new, and when you had to update something, you had to read multiple hardware compatibility lists to make sure that all the updates that you were installing were compatible with each other. What we've done in our system, we sell appliances, which means we sell hard and software together, which in turn means that we always know what the hardware below the software is. So if we send an update to a cluster, both the software components and the required hardware components are in the update already. Other than that, updating a skill cluster is easier than updating your mobile phone. If you want to update your mobile phone, you need to think about when can I do this, because when I'm updating, nobody can call me. If you're updating a skill computing cluster, during the upgrade, everything will continue to work. So like with your phone, when there is an update available, you will see a notification that says an update is available. You can click on that, or in this case, I'll click on the version number, and you will go to our control center and then the update page, where if there is an update, which right now there is not, a short description will be given of what's in that update and a big black button that says apply update. When you click the big black button, apply update, from that moment on, everything is fully automated, meaning we do a so-called rolling upgrade. And that in turn means that the VMs from the first node will be evacuated off that node, so will be moved to the other nodes. When that node is empty, it will first be checked to see whether or not it's still healthy. Then it will be upgraded. And after that upgrade, it will be checked again. If everything is still okay, the virtual machines will be moved back to that node and will continue with nodes 2, 3, 5, 8, however, whatever amount of nodes you have in your cluster. In the middle of our interface, so the top middle over here, you see the resource usage in CPU, RAM, disk, IOPS, and latency. We are a hyper-converged solution, so we do not just manage the virtualization, but we also manage the storage. So in the disk section, I can actually click on that to get some additional information. So over here in this overview at utilization, you can see that I'm currently using 3 terabytes for my virtual machines, about 3.5 terabytes for my snapshots. In the efficiency section, you can see that I'm saving 6 terabytes through deduplication. And in the provisioning section, you can see that I'm actually thin provisioning approximately 70% of my data. Now, very important to realize, I'm talking about multiple different features, and Rick has already mentioned this, but I think it's very important to know that we do not have separate licenses for separate functionality. If you buy a skill cluster, it will always do everything that's in there. So I've talked about snapshots, I've talked about deduplication, I've talked about thin provisioning. There are no separate licenses. Even replication is integrated into the appliance, always. On the right-hand side of the top view of our management interface, we see the notification center. If anything is wrong with the cluster, one of these warning signs will light up, and you can then click on that and you'll go to the control center and the conditions page, where you will see a description of what's happening, a detailed description of what's happening over there. Now, the top side of our interface, we call the heads-up display, and this is where you can, in one overview, see what is happening with your cluster. If you have multiple clusters, like for instance, in the deployment options slide that Rick showed, if you have multiple clusters and they are connected together, you can actually see all the clusters in one overview. So I have my 4K cluster, I have a 150 cluster, and I have a cloud cluster that I can work with. And from all of these clusters, I can see what is going on. Now, my cloud cluster is actually giving me 2 notices. So I can just click on this. I'll be redirected to my other cluster. Of course, I have to tell it that I am me. And here you can see that, for instance, I have a storage problem. We already saw that, but you can see that. Now, if you have multiple clusters, but you do not have them connected, obviously they will not show up here. But we are going to launch within a couple of weeks a new tool, the skill management tool, where you will have an overview of multiple clusters. So in this overview over here, not only do I have the 3 clusters that are connected together, but I also have all of my US-based demo clusters and my public access clusters reported over here. And also over here, we already saw that my cloud cluster had a problem, but let's click on it over here. This will also show you what the issues are over here, what the VMs are that are running on it, what the resource consumption is, etc., etc. Now, currently, or at its release, which is, like I said, within a couple of weeks, I have to say within a couple of weeks, but from what I understand is that we're actually going to launch at the end of this week, but I can't promise anything, so I'm not going to tell you that right now. But at launch, this tool will be a read-only tool. So this would be, for instance, for MSPs to, or for you to check how your different clusters are doing. In the near future, we will change this to where you can also perform certain actions from this page. For instance, one of the first ones is going to be firmware upgrades. As you can see, my clusters over here are actually running a higher version than the other clusters in this system. Going back here, that actually concludes the top side of the web of the interface. Then one level down, we have these 3 blocks, and over here there's 3 blocks. In my cloud cluster, you could see that there's 1 block. This is representative to the number of nodes that are in my system. So if I have 3 nodes, you see 3 blocks. If I have 5 blocks, you see I have 5 nodes, etc., etc. And you can also recognize them by the IP addresses over here. Maybe when you looked closely, you can actually see that I'm connected to the first node in the cluster. This is not mandatory. In a skill computing environment, every node in a cluster is a fully self-sustained management entity. So if my first node for some reason crashes, I can simply just connect to the second node. I'll have to tell it that I am me again, like that. And over here, you will see that I have exactly the same management information. My apologies for the noise of my coffee machine shutting down. But as you can see, I have no single point of failure for my management, like you have, for instance, with Hyper-V, with the virtual machine manager or things like that. On the right-hand side of the node, you can see that I have 126 GB or 128 GB of RAM in my system, and that I have this in every node. But also, this is not mandatory. Within the skill solution, we have a mix and match system, which allows me to combine nodes with different memory configurations, different CPU configurations, and different storage configurations in one and the same cluster. And by using this mix and match, I can even connect newer nodes into an older cluster. To make sure that that properly resonates, the cluster that I'm currently doing the demo on is already 11 years old, and still I can add the newest nodes that we have to this cluster to make the cluster bigger, to expand it. The blue lines that you see over here are representative to the virtual machines, the memory consumption of the virtual machines that are running here. In the same overview, I also have a disk overview, and here you can see that I'm having 6 nearline SAS drives and 2 SSDs in every node. And again, keep in mind that through mix and match, we can have different configurations in there. So this system that I'm working with here is a hybrid system. Hybrid meaning that I have different disk types in there. So we have systems with disk only, which are very usable still with CCTV solutions. We have hybrid systems like this one, which can give you a balanced system for different uses. But we also have SSD only systems, and all the way in the top range, we also have systems with only NVMe in there, obviously for extreme high storage performance. In a hybrid system such as mine, all the disks are in one single storage pool. So from a hardware perspective, these disks are not managed. There is no RAID controller or something like that at present. All disks are being managed as JBODs from a hardware perspective. And in software, by making use of resiliency factor 2, we write all data that is being written to the cluster to at least 2 different disks in 2 different systems. The performance difference between the nearline SAS drives and the SSDs is being managed by an auto tiering system. So for this demo, when I scroll down a little bit, I'll go to my domain controller over here. When I click on devices over here, you can see that I have 2 virtual hard drives in there. Yeah, you can see this little hard drive icon over there. When behind my C drive, I click on the More button. On the top side, we will see the device configuration. In the middle, we'll see the size configuration. And at the bottom over here, we see the hypercore auto tiering priority. When I set this to 0, all data will be written to the spinning disk. When I set this to 11, all data will be written to the SSDs. And when I set this somewhere in between, where 4 is the default, I said 4. Hello, click. I said where 4 is the default, all data will be written to SSD. And depending on how old the data is, how often the data is being used, but also depending on performance requirements on other virtual disks, etc., 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 that data will then later be offloaded to the spinning disks in the system. In this way, in a hybrid system, you have a system where data that is really important to you is automatically on the faster storage, and the data that is less important or is just there, which is passive data, will be automatically on the cheap storage. Going one more level down, we have our VM overview. So this, the bottom part of the interface is where you can see all the virtual machines. As you can see in my overview, I have multiple folders of different VMs in there with different roles and different things in there. I usually just have this open because I think that's an easier overview and I can just scroll through them. In this same overview, I can also change different view types of the virtual machine. So right now we see the performance view of all the virtual machines. I could say, you know what, I want to see the devices of all virtual machines, or I want to see the snapshots of all virtual machines, etc., etc. A new virtual machine is very, very easy. So if I click on this button over here, I can call this new virtual machine very easy. I can give it, oh, I clicked the wrong button. My apologies. There we go. Again, I can call this very easy. I can give it a description. I'm going to skip that for now. Tags in our system are relatively important. As you can see, the first tag is creating the group that I'm working with. So over here, I have these folders. One is DVR test, one is infra services. I'm creating a new group now that is called demo. But I could also say, you know what, this is for application 1. Let's say application 1, or maybe this would be, let's say, a virtual machine for location 1, or it may be even a virtual machine for customer 5. Let's put it like that. The group tag, so the first tag determines the group that's in there. All the tags together can be used with the filter over here or with our REST API in the backend. In the operating system section, I'm choosing Windows or something good. In the driver section, I'm choosing performance or compatible, where performance are our own devices. In the boot type, and this is relatively important nowadays, in the boot type, I can choose BIOS or UEFI. If I want to use Server 2022, or if I want to use Hyper-V Gen 2, or want to convert Hyper-V Gen 2 VMs, for instance, I need to use a UEFI, or even Windows 11 nowadays requires a UEFI, because the UEFI also has a virtual trusted platform module. So you can do encryption there. In the CPU section, I choose how many CPUs. In the memory section, how much memory. In the drive section, how big my drive in gigabytes or terabytes, and maybe add another drive over here. In the boot from section, I can choose a installation image that I want to use. So in my case, I'm choosing a Server 2019 ISO that I've uploaded previously. When I say create over here, you will see that within 5 to 15 seconds, that new group demo has been created and that the virtual machine is there. Now, this virtual machine still needs to be installed, and nobody likes installing virtual machines. Next, finish. We've all done that too often. So as asked before, I also have the possibility of using templates in this system. So over here, I have a Server 2019 system prepared, a template that I've prepared. I can just simply hit the clone button. I'm going to call this really easy 2. Probably going to delete that, put it in the demo group, delete the templates group over here, and then say clone. And then within that same 5 to 15 seconds, I have a virtual machine that is ready to use. Here is the really easy 2 virtual machine. Just power it on, change the administrator password, and you're good to go.
One additional question: if it's possible to automatically scale up the virtual machine, if it's for sometimes running at the 100% load, if it's possible to increase the performance, the power of the VM, like by some detection rule automatically, so that user involvement needs to be.
So from what I understood, is the question is, can I automate additional resources into a virtual machine if it requires?
Exactly. Yeah.
Sorry, the answer there is no. No. The thing there is that from a automation perspective, that might sound as a really handy thing, but the thing is that you might actually lose control of your system if too many virtual machines are asking for too many resources, for instance. So
yeah, but still there's an option when you can limit how much it can increase. Yeah. And of course, that notifications and anything about notifications, if it about and the reporting, you will explain it a little bit later, or
yeah. So notifications basically come from the system itself, and just to go into the story, obviously we have a notification center here. We also have email notifications. We have the possibility to add syslog, and we have a REST API that you can so that you can integrate this system in your own monitoring system. So from a notification perspective, we have several options that are available to you. From a reporting stance, that's actually something that we think belongs with your monitoring tool, and we don't provide monitoring tools. We provide a platform.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
The last way of getting a new virtual machine into this platform is by doing an import. Our import mechanism over here says that it only supports HC3 format VMs, but it actually also supports VMware virtual machines, Hyper-V virtual machines, and Xen server virtual machines. And the conversion for those virtual machines will be done automatically by the system. So that's really easy. Unfortunately, that system depends on an export and then an import. So if a virtual machine is multiple terabytes big, this might cost you several hours. So for that same purpose, we actually also have a software-based solution, which is called HC3 Move. And with HC3 Move, I can do a replication of data and settings from a older type virtual machine to a new type virtual machine. Once that replication is done, the tool actually allows you a failover button, or actually it gives you a failover option. When you press that, the old virtual machine will be shut down. The new virtual machine will reboot one time to get the host name, domain, and IP addresses sorted out. And when it's rebooted, you have actually migrated your workload. And this is a highly automated way. last but not least, in terms of migration, if you are already an Acronis partner, or if you are interested in the Acronis product, through Acronis, through the convert to VM methodology of Acronis, you can also do migration. So if you already are an Acronis partner, that would actually make it easier to do that. So far, so good on the new virtual machines. Let's take a look at what's in those virtual machines. So let's go back to my domain controller over here. The default view is the performance view. So over here, I can see, sorry for that, what this virtual machine is doing in terms of performance. Its IP address, and over here I can also change the virtual machine. I can live migrate the virtual machine. If it's not running, I can delete it. And over here again, I can take a clone and a snapshot. And for the clones and snapshots, we use a VSS driver, so these clones and snapshots can be application consistent. And obviously for Linux machines, we use a guest agent. One button up is the console. The console of virtual machines is also fully in HTML5. You do not need any additional management tools to work with this solution. One level down over here, we have the devices. We've already seen this a little bit, but if I quickly go back to our very easy virtual machine over here, you can see that I do not only have the Server 2019 ISO that I requested, but since I chose Windows in the wizard, it also automatically gave me the correct version of the skill guest tools. In the drive section, because this virtual machine currently is not running, I can also change the device type. Obviously, making the disk bigger or changing the heat priority can be done when the virtual machine is running. Changing the device type, for that, the VM needs to be shut down. And similar for the network environment, I have the choice of multiple chipsets. So I have possibility to use a Realtek chipset, an Intel chipset, or a VirtIO chipset over there. One thing that we do slightly different than our competitors is we define VLANs on the network card and not on a vSwitch. We do use vSwitches. Actually, we use open vSwitches, but we manage VLANs from a network card perspective to make it in such a way that the virtual switches do not need any management. So virtual switches are actually created automatically for every VLAN that you assign something to. So if I want this virtual machine to be in VLAN 102, I'll just give it VLAN 102 over here, which means that it's automatically connected to the correct vSwitch. If that vSwitch does not exist yet, it will be automatically created. In the end, all vSwitches will be added to a trunk. So the nodes will always communicate as a trunk. Lastly, over here, the Snapshot Engine, and obviously snapshots is cooler in a running VM. Over here, you see our Snapshot Engine. And one of the things that you might immediately see is that I have already 8 active snapshots on this particular virtual machine. And I always like to go to the virtual machine of my German colleague. He has a slightly different schedule on it. He currently has 24 active snapshots on a single virtual machine. And we can actually do this without the performance penalty that you have with other platforms. So with VMware, vSAN, with Nutanix, with our competitors in hyper-converged infrastructure, what you see is that they always make use of a so-called object-based file system. And they do this because they are attaching multiple older file systems together. So just to give you an impression, in certain configurations within Nutanix, you will have an ext3 or ext4 file system on each hard disk. Then you will have a distribution layer on top of that, and then you will have the Nutanix own file system to make sure that you can do Prism storage management. By doing this in this way and by creating an object-based file system, they have the advantage that they're actually managing less entities, because what they're doing is they're bundling the blocks on the hard drives in objects of approximately 100 megabytes. So this means that you have less objects that you're managing, so your management overhead is slightly smaller there. The downside of working in such a way is that the objects that you are managing are really big. So let's imagine on a VMware vSAN environment that you take a snapshot of a particular virtual machine. Now, once this snapshot is done, you start to change data. What will happen is that the new data, you have to do an allocate on write for this, so that new data will be, in case of VMware, will be placed in a Delta file with additional pointers to this. Unfortunately, this is not just the block that has changed. So let's say we changed a point in a comma and have to update a block. That's not just a block that's been updated, but in the background, we need to copy the rest of that 100 megabytes into that Delta file because we need to have a complete object. Now, if at a later time I change another block in that same object and I do a new allocator, right, I am going to again copy the entire object into that Delta file. So for just 2 blocks of changes, I already have a Delta file, which is 200 megabytes. Now imagine having a database server with a gazillion transactions a second on it, and you can see where this is going. This does not only give you a size overhead. So for instance, in VMware, the size of a snapshot can grow 2, 3, 4 times as big as the original VM. So not just in size, but also in performance. Now imagine having to read back different data from within different objects. It could be so that for just 2 or 3 blocks, I have to read multiple objects of 100 megabytes. So my read is also slower. We have created a so-called block-based distributed file system, which means we have more entities to manage, as we have already discussed, but it also means that the entities that we are managing are way, way smaller. And because they are smaller, because it's just a block and we don't have that performance overhead and we don't have that capacity overhead, we support up to 5,000 snapshots per virtual machine with a retention time of 10 years. This is slightly different than the best practice from VMware, for instance, where they say maybe 2 or 3 snapshots with a maximum retention time of 3 weeks. So if you support so many snapshots, you can start to do more intelligent things with your snapshots. For instance, I have attached a schedule, a snapshot schedule to my virtual machine. And with that snapshot schedule, I've automated my snapshots. So as you can see, I've got multiple daily and weekly snapshots going on over here. Now, if I go to my schedules over here and then go to that particular silver a snapshot, you can see that I'm taking a snapshot every day, which I locally keep for 3 days. So on the cluster itself for 3 days, and on my replica side for a week. And then again, I do a weekly snapshot, which I locally keep for 1 week. And on my remote side, I keep for 10 years. Keeping this for 10 years, for instance, make sure that I'm doing right by the tax offices in the Netherlands. Now, one of the questions that I usually get at this moment is, hey, William, that sounds like a backup schedule, but I've always learned that a snapshot is never a backup. And in the basics, you are right. A snapshot is never a backup because snapshot data is dependent on the virtual machine itself. Meaning, if I delete this virtual machine, I automatically also delete all the snapshot data. The same goes for a replica. So a replica is never a backup because if I change data in the original VM, I also change this in the replica. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been a replica. This is the whole reason that we do snapshot-based replication. The downside of snapshot-based replication is that it's always asynchronous. So we support a RTO, RPO of 5 minutes, which is our minimum. The benefit of doing snapshot-based replications is that on both sides, so on my replica side and on my original side, I have a list of snapshots that I can work with for recovery purposes, for recreation purposes. I found out yesterday that I actually have a customer that on his remote side, he creates a clone of a virtual machine every week, so he can do his reporting on the database and not do that reporting on the database in his production environment, which I thought was really intelligent. But not only can I create the entire virtual machine on both sides, also on both sides, I can open up the list of snapshots. And if I have running VMs, I can actually attach such a disk to another virtual machine to do a file level recovery. So because I have the ability to recreate the entire virtual machine, both locally and remote, even if the local version is no longer there, I dare to say that with 2 skill systems, actually, I have a proper backup system. Now, our backup is limited to a file level restore only. So the lowest level that we can go to is file level. With our partnership with Acronis, this is being extended to also being able to recover objects. So for instance, an object in Active Directory, an email in Exchange, or a line in a database. But the partnership with Acronis gives us something additional, and that additional is a very valuable thing here. The additional thing that we get with Acronis is the possibility of doing a convert to VM from our system to another system, or from another system to our system. So for instance, in my protection plan over here, I've got my agentless backups. And one of the things that I can do, which I think is really, really valuable, is in my agentless protection plan, I can add a convert to VM. So over here, I can say, you know what, enable this. And for disaster recovery reasons, make or create an ESXi virtual machine on an ESX environment that I have somewhere else. Now, if you all remember, 3 weeks ago, Microsoft released a faulty patch for Hyper-V. So what this did is that domain controllers went into a boot loop, and the other thing is that Hyper-V, the Hyper-V role after a reboot would not start anymore. If you have a Hyper-V environment with a Hyper-V disaster recovery environment, and your Hyper-V environments will not start anymore, then your recovery side actually has no value. So from that perspective, if for instance you have a Hyper-V environment in your production environment and you want to do disaster recovery, it's a very smart thing to not do disaster recovery on Hyper-V, but to do disaster recovery on, I work for skill computing, so I'm going to say on a skill computing environment. And with this convert to VM environment, you are capable of transforming ESXi virtual machines, Hyper-V virtual machines, skill computing virtual machines, and even VMware Workstation virtual machines in any of those other technologies. Thus being able to do your disaster recovery environment on a different solution than your primary environment without having to add any forms of complexity. So this partnership with Acronis is really important for us at Skill Computing. Final part of my demonstration is going over the control center. So a couple of things that I think is really important in our log. Everything is by name, so we can always see who has done what. In the conditions section, we've talked about this. Control is where I properly shut down my cluster. Media is where I upload my own ISO files. Remote clusters, we've talked about that. Remote support is a very important part of our solution. Rick already told you that we only have one support type, which is 24/7, 365 days a year. But we also, as part of that support solution, have a remote support option, which allows our engineer to do the diagnostics and troubleshooting on the cluster. So if you have a cluster either at your own location or maybe at a customer or wherever you're going to have that, something is wrong with that cluster, you can just simply enter the code that the support engineer gave you over here, and then the cluster makes a connection with our support department, and our engineer can do all the troubleshooting. Now, keep in mind that for this troubleshooting, he can obviously look at the log files, he can look at the storage system, he can look at the hypervisor. He cannot look into your data because that data is inside the VM and we cannot look inside of those VMs. On the other hand, our support engineer will never ask you to run a weird diagnostics tool against the cluster and then upload stuff to an FTP or something like that. No, we can do everything ourselves. So I often like to say that actually our support engineers give you your weekend back. Once your case is done, you can simply just click on close connection and all connections between the system and our support department are severed again. Schedules is we have already seen. Settings is where we have all the generic settings for any IT solution. By the way, in reference to the question earlier about notification, this is where you set up your email notifications and your syslog notifications. We also have a REST API, and the REST API actually also has some statistic reporting. So for instance, if I go over here to the ver domain stats, which is the statistics of all the VMs in a single API call, I can just go over, click on get. Here you will see what the information is that is required, but I can also just try it out. And here you can see, for instance, the results that come out of such an API. So, for instance, if you're using Splunk, Splunk is compatible with reading JSON files, or if you're using any JSON compatible monitoring tool, it allows you to just periodically retrieve this info and go into it. Another thing is that that same historical data, which is not in our GUI, will be available in the HC3 platform. So in this reporting tool, within approximately 6 months, we will also have a feature for historical data. Almost there. The last thing I want to show in settings is that we have integration with OpenID, meaning that you can connect this cluster to any identity provider that you like to give you not just a local user database, but a sanctioned user database, and also with, for instance, multi-factor authentication for the system. In the SSL certificate section, I can upload a certificate. As you can see, I have not done that, but you can do that. Updates we've spoken about. User management is where I made it so that Rick, for instance, cannot accidentally shut down my cluster. Obviously, this is based on our local database. If you have a, for instance, Active Directory integration, all these roles are being set in Active Directory. Support is where we have our community. This is where we have a forum with users interacting with each other. We have a partner portal where you can register your deals, so to make sure that you are the only one that gets all the discounts, but also where you can manage the service cases for your customers. And we have a link to our support page where we actually have all of our European phone numbers registered for you to contact our support department. One of the things that I want to reiterate, say again, we only have 24/7 support, so you can always call our support department. Last but not least, when I push the exit button over here, you have actually seen all of the features in a scale computing environment. And I'd like to end off with congratulations. You are now all scale certified. Questions? Also remember that you can ask the questions in your own language and that they can be translated for you.
Jā, lūdzu dalībnieki jautājumus, lai kolēģi var izskaidrot visu, kamēr ir vēl šeit. So all guys was done very detailed, so there is no questions.
Yeah, or we have put everyone to sleep, for which we're sorry if that's the case.
If later on there are any questions for everyone, feel free to reach out to Hermitage with your questions, and if needed, they can forward them to Rick and me.
Same thing goes if you want to have pricing information, if you want to have a specific solution for a current workload, we can do sizing, we can do measuring, we can do quoting on that. Or if you're just curious, if you just want to know what the thing costs, let us know.
Of course, Rick. Labi, tad ņemiet lūdzu vērā, jā, ka tiešām, ja ir nepieciešams demo klāsters, tas ir pieejams pie mums, Hermitage Solutions. Ja ir vajadzīgas aptuvenās cenas, lai saprastu, cik risinājums maksā, tas ir iespējams. Ja ir vēl kādi jautājumi, ko sapratīsiet pēc demonstrācijas, pēc mūsu tikšanās, tad droši dodiet ziņu, mēs uz tiem atbildēsim. Un, ja vairāk jautājumu nav, tad šodienai tas arī viss. Paldies, ka piedalījāties. So, okay, guys, thank you for demo.
Thank you guys for being here.
Yes, thanks for giving us some
Thank you
time.
very much.
Paldies, lai visiem veiksmīgs vakars. Atā.
Thank you guys.
Cheers.
Bye.